Hello and welcome to the latest presentation of the Rift Valley Webinar Series. My name is Anne Kruijt and I'm the host for today's talk. If you're participating in the live webinar, you can submit questions or comments in the chat module of the Zoom application at any time during the presentation, and we will have time to address these questions once the presentation is complete. Today's speaker is Sara Petrollino. Sara is a university lecturer at Leiden University and is interested in language description and typology with a focus on East Africa. She is currently working in Hamar, a nomadic language spoken in southwest Ethiopia, and she is also interested in language contact and in the relation between language and culture. Today's webinar is a bit special in that the research on which it was based was conducted not in the Tanzanian Rift Valley area, but much further north in Ethiopia. With that said, Sara's topic, the methods for studying how people talk about cattle, is highly applicable to many of the languages of the Tanzanian Rift, and the underlying concept is useful for any linguist seeking to understand principles of categorization, such as code pattern and color, from an emic perspective. Please join me in welcoming Sara as she gives her talk, The Investigation of Appearance in Hamar, Methodological Challenges and Preliminary Results.
Thank you for the introduction, Anne. I would like to thank also the Rift Valley Network for having me today and for creating such a nice venue to share our experiences in the Rift Valley. So as Anne said, today we're gonna leave for a moment the Tanzanian Rift Valley and we will go to Ethiopia, not exactly in the Ethiopian Rift Valley, but not far from that. So before I begin, I want to say something about my research, which is concerned with visual semantics in bovine cultures. I'm focusing on the semantics of appearance, or to use a traditional label, the cattle color and pattern terms. And for the moment, I'm focusing on Hamar, which is a South Omotic language. As you can see from this map, Hamar is surrounded by groups speaking Cushitic, Omotic, and Nilotic languages. So back in March, I was just about to move from Hamar to the Borana pastoralists who live east of Hamar. The Borana speak an Oromo dialect. And the reason for that is that I'm trying to collect comparative data across bovine cultures. However, I had to interrupt my fieldwork because of the COVID pandemic. So I would like to introduce this subject with a beautiful visual example that was created by Jean-Baptiste Exer, who is an anthropologist who also works in southwest Ethiopia with the Mursi pastoralist. So he created this visual example to show how the terms describing cattle coats are used to describe other types of appearance. So for example, the term lui, which refers to black, white, black color pattern on an animal coat, can be the body of a colobus monkey, as well as the alternation of white tourist cars on a dark track. So I find this image very useful because it gives us an idea of how in bovine cultures, any type of visual experience can be communicated in terms of cattle appearance. So we know now that the European visual systems are chromatocentric in the sense that are based on hue. Hue plays a very important role. But there are also other visual systems that are based on different features, such as visual conspicuousness, texture, process of change, and so on. For cattle-based visual systems, it has been argued that colors and patterns are difficult to separate, but also that pattern terms are psychologically salient. So they basically meet the criteria to be considered basic color terms. These languages also pose the question of whether it is a color idiom which is applied to cattle or a cattle idiom that is applied to color. Okay, now we can move to the investigation of appearance in Hamar. The Hamar are agro-pastoralist people. Their culture has been thoroughly studied by Ivo Strecker and Jill Lytle, two anthropologists who spend their lives living with them, and they have produced an enormous corpus of literature, documentaries on various aspects of the language. Jill Lytle was also the the first one who published a grammatical sketch of this language in the 70s, and she also published on several aspects of the language. So Hamar is one of those languages that doesn't have a word for color. This is a common feature in pastoral cultures, but also it seems to be a feature of the Ethiopian language area. So instead of having a word for color, there is a general term that refers to appearance. When talking about appearance in Hamar, there are three terms that are used. One is bishi, which refers to appearance or to skin. Sara is the general term for body. And danta is a term that I translated as appearance, behavior, way of being, but it was recently translated in Amharic as type or kind. So there are different ways of asking about appearance of objects, entities, and one of these three terms is basically used. So expressions like bishno tamane or zarano tamane. So in order to talk about appearance in Hamar, there is a rich vocabulary that includes the terms for solid color terms, pattern terms, but there is also a sort of hybrid category that includes terms that have been defined as colored patterns or patterned colors or design plus color. These categories seems to conflate together colorific qualities and pattern-like, design-like qualities. The terms used to describe appearance in Hamar, so these solid color terms and pattern terms, describe any type of appearance. They are not only restricted to cattle. Moreover, in Hamar, these terms are not derived from other sources, at least synchronically. And this is a bit different from what has been reported for other languages, where terms for colors or patterns can be derived from animals or plants that display that particular feature. The solid color terms in Hamar function both as nouns and verbs, whereas the pattern and the colored pattern terms seems to be only nouns. At least so far I haven't tested them in other functions. There is also a small set of idiophones, pu, dil, and di. These idiophones were translated by Lidl as intense black, intense white, and intense red. And I have reported, I found that pu and dil actually are used in context where lightness and darkness are referred to. So they don't necessarily refer to black or white hues, but to lightness and darkness, whereas red indeed is used for intense or pure red. There are also idiophones for repeated patterns, and for livestock only, there is a rich vocabulary that has to do with the beautification of cattle. So there are terms to describe the horn shapes, the ear cuts, the tattoos. And as part of my project, of course, I'm documenting this terminology, but this is not going to be the focus of the talk today. So when I started my fieldwork in January on this topic, the aim was to, first of all, elicit the vocabulary and study the meaning and the referential range of the terms, so including the grammatical features, the distributional characteristics of these terms. And I also wanted to check the consistency within the speech community for describing appearance. So I have combined mixed methods, including structured and semi-structured interviews. And I designed 3 tasks with visual stimuli. And as we will see, I used the task itself and some of the responses to kind of encourage informal conversations with the speakers or among the speakers. Now, when investigating color and appearance in general, the traditional methodology is that was introduced by Berlin and Kay, which consists of the free listing task and the color chips naming task. I didn't focus a lot on this task because there was a very good work carried out in 1978 by Jean Liddell and Ivo Strecker that basically tested the color system of Hamar. But still, I want to say something about this task before moving to the code naming task, the coloring task, and the pattern naming task that I designed for Hamar. The free listing task, for those who are not familiar with color science, consists of asking speakers to list the color terms that are available in their language, whereas the color chips naming task consists of asking speakers to name colored cards. I find this task very useful as a starting point to have a sort of overview of the color lexicon, and you can also get an idea of the hue-related meanings. However, these tasks are deemed insufficient by the speakers themselves. In fact, there are many terms that simply can't be used with color chips because they are not represented by the hues of the color chips. Moreover, the free listing tasks in Hamar elicit terms for appearance in general. So I've never heard Hamar speakers listing the terms for hues alone, for color alone. They would always include the so-called cattle color terms. And this is an indication that really these terms are salient in Hamar. So this is just a very quick overview of the color terms of Hamar. I basically, I used the color rate corporation cards to check the terms for colors, and I didn't find a lot of differences from what was reported by Jean Liddell in 1978. What is interesting about the Hamar system is that there is a term mora, which is used with the gray and brown colored chips and with different shades of grays and brown. For the for red shades, I found the term der, which was also reported by Liddell. Liddell, in addition, also elicited the term zo, which was translated as the color of the blood or darker shades of red. And I have to say, I never elicited this term with the colored cards. However, the speakers know the term, and they explained to me that is an archaic form, a term that was used in the past. But it is interesting because there is also, I think Doris Payne for Maasai reported a similar situation where there are two stems for red. For the shades of green, I elicited the term chagaj and chagi, which were basically synonyms. So they're used with the same hues for green, basically. However, chagaj was explained to me as the term used for plants, leaves, vegetation in general, whereas chagi is the term used nowadays only for beads and clothes. So this is a bit different from the results of Jean Liddell. She reported also a term that I have never collected, and this is chalal, which is a group term, so a term that is used for blue beads and green beads as well. So in order to go beyond the hue-related meanings, I arranged another type of naming task, the code naming task. And with this task, I wanted to see how the Hamar described the coats of their livestock. So I basically took several pictures of Hamar cattle, and I used a selection of this as a test. I asked 27 speakers of different age and sex from different areas and villages to describe the appearance of these coats. The pictures included also a picture of a donkey and a goat, because I was particularly interested in those coats. And I also included the picture of the same cow, but in different positions and environments, so to check the internal validity of the responses. These are some pictures that show the naming task in progress. So I basically asked about appearance, and the answer consisted of 1 or 2 responses. Usually the second response added more detailed information about the coat of the animal. The Hamar were, regardless of age or sex, they were very fast in answering the test. So the test basically was run very smoothly. I think it took more or less 30 minutes per person. In addition to the coat naming task with the 27 subjects, I also used the pictures that I used for this task to have more information about the appearance of the coats. So basically I used the visual stimuli as the basis for a semi-structured interview or for informal conversations. So I want to quickly show you a video that shows how I did it, and yes.
Kau intagia?
Kakuli.
Silbi laba?
Silbi labal. Silbi amotene.
Silbi kisa kuru ka tiyatai. Ka kisa tiyadatai. Dirt kotida. Kotidirda. Keda silbi kotid tiya kotida. Chaulipir da. Kinka matai. Siti makantai. Siti makan. Tiyabe, dirbe, chaulibe.
Labal amotene.
Kash.
Kash chauli labal.
Ka chauli be.
Silbi amotene. Are. Silbi are.
Tiya kasi.
Tiyabe derbe kinka.
Derbe kinka.
Silbi.
Silbi. Labal kisa chauli.
Waki silbi. Odi afili. Ka silbi.
Agak silbi.
Ka silbi.
Labal.
Silbi labal. Labal shada bode.
Kolai.
Kolai kenna.
Silbi.
Silbi. Ka silbi. Ka silbi. Derbe tiabe.
Silbi.
Inardili. Yer abi silbi dao.
Yer abi.
Kuri silbi da. Inta kan silbi. Ana. Kuri chauli. Kuri silbi da.
Kuri sa dono. Kisa zarano birai si chauli. Daran keda dir. Agorra zarano pir tsiya. Birai si chauli. Daran keda dir. Agar tsiya keda. Aga kisa. Tsiya keda kidi katti dais. Shopinu kisa washidi. Washi matina keda tsiya. Shiti indonk. Dirbe chauli bish. Birai sali indonk chauli. Daran dera keda tsiya.
Silbi kolei.
Silbi ana silbi ama. Aga tsiya ni. Shop. Kedi tsiya ni.
Okay, so as you can see from this video, these type of commentaries are very useful because you can get all sorts of information about the meanings of the term, the extended meanings. For example, I learned in this particular example about the position of a particular design on the body of the animal. But it was very useful to collect folk definitions, and the pictures in general can be used as an excuse to talk about appearance in general. So we ended up talking about the color and the texture of the honey. So this coat naming task was an excellent source of lexicon. It also provided an overview of the cattle-centered meanings, but it also provided an overview of the combinatory possibilities. As we will see in a few seconds, these terms can be combined, and there are only a number of combinations that are possible. The semi-structured interviews, moreover, can provide information about the grammatical features and the distributional characteristics of these terms. So, for example, in the video, the terms for black, red, and white were used both as nouns and then later as verbs. The code naming task is also very useful because it proves the consistency of the system across the speech community. This is very interesting because in the literature on cattle color terms in bovine cultures, it is never reported how consistent these systems are. There was a mention of it in a study on cattle color terms among the Zulu pastoralists in 1996. And for the Zulu pastoralists, it was mentioned that there is a lot of areal variation and herders have to discuss at length before agreeing on a description for a code. Whereas this is not the case in Hamar, regardless of the gender, of the age and the area, there is a standardized, consistent system. The results of the code naming task also show some minor dialectal variation. So, for example, the Hamar who live south close to the Dasanech speakers have borrowed some terms from Dasanech, and these terms were never used among the Hamar who live more in the north of the Hamar land. The test is also very useful because it shows the distribution of knowledge across sex and age. So usually men and boys are the most knowledgeable about cattle appearance, but for example, in those homesteads where families keep the cattle closer instead of sending the cattle to the cattle camps, the women were equally knowledgeable as men. The code naming task also shows interesting patterns concerning the acquisition of categories by children. For example, it seems that solid colors are more easily individuated than the patterned colors, where we can see that there is a higher rate of mistakes among children in individuating those phenotypes. So the code naming task revealed that there are 18 main terms. These include the solid color terms that we have already seen, the colored patterns, and the pure patterns. As I said, these terms can be combined, and out of the 306 possible combinations, 152 combinations are grammatically correct, but they also refer to existing phenotypes in Hamar herds. So I have arranged all the accepted and attested combinations in a double entry table to study the combinatory possibilities. As you can see, there are some terms like der and mora that can freely combine in der mora or mora der. Now, in these situations, the first term of the compound refers to the most visually prominent feature on the surface or on the coat of the animal in this case. So der refers to the redness, der mora means that the redness is more visually prominent compared to a mora der type of coat. Other terms cannot be freely combined in such a way. So for example, the pure pattern terms like labal or bala or gawa can only occur as the second element in a compound. As you can see, I have also arranged these terms in a sort of gradual scale that goes from solid colors through colored patterns to patterns. And I've done this in a sort of, following my intuition and my understanding of the semantics of these terms, but I've also used the Hamar classification system. So how the Hamar speakers have explained this classification to me. And there are some terms that really, that are difficult to categorize as solid colors or colored patterns. For example, the term for mora that we saw in colored chips naming task refers to the gray and the brown chips, it actually refers to a mixture of these different colors, and also to features that are not necessarily linked with the hue, but with other properties like saturation, desaturation, and so on. Guita as well, and the term silbi refer to colorific properties that have to be distributed in a particular way on a surface. So in this sense, it is difficult to draw a strict line between these different categories. Same thing for turga or lala. These are pattern terms, but that always include colorific qualities. Okay, now I want to move to the second task, the coloring task. The coloring task was basically inspired by the ethnographer's way of representing the rich vocabularies of pastoral societies, together with the body coloring task that is used in cognitive linguistics. So the body coloring task is used to understand the extensional meaning of body part terms. So the empty figure of a human body is given to speakers who are asked to color in a particular body part term. So you can see how body part terms across languages segment the human body. So what I did, I basically provided the speakers with an empty picture of a cow, and I asked them to color in with an artificial color a particular term. So this is an example of the type of responses. This is the term gawa. Gawa is a bicolor pattern, is a true pattern term. And by comparing different responses with the response I get from the code naming task, I can understand the meanings of this term. Now, this task is very useful because it provides insights on the distribution of patterns on the body of the animal, but it also shows what is diagnostic in a phenotype to be called in a certain way. So for example, the three pictures that you see here on the right are not labeled Gawa. These are not Gawa types in Hamar. And this task was very useful in enlightening the meaning and understanding why these pictures don't represent a Gawa type. If you look closely at the drawing task, you can see that the colored area doesn't go further than the neck, whereas in those pictures, the colored area goes far beyond the hump. And this is diagnostic for the speakers to say that these are not Gawa types, but are named, belong to other types of phenotypes. This task was also very useful to understand the separation of colorific categories and pattern categories. So the reason why I used an artificial color was exactly to see what terms can be represented without colors and without colorific properties. So when the speakers felt that they needed colored pencils and they would ask for colored pencils to represent a particular term, that was diagnostic for me to say, okay, this term means that there are also colorific qualities involved in the meaning. The coloring task is also very useful to collect folk definitions and to understand the conceptualizations of these categories, especially when speakers work together in two or in three, and they discuss how to color, how to represent a particular term. This is an example of the coloring task with colored pencils. This is the the coat called Silbi. If you recall from the video, Silbi was described as a mixture of red and black, and in fact the speaker picked up the red, also the brown and black pencils to represent this particular coat. And here you can compare it with the actual Silbi phenotypes of Hamar. And this is another example of the coloring task. Here I asked the speakers to color in the term mora. So mora in the chips coloring, in the chips naming task was used for the brown and the gray colored chips and for different shades of gray and brown. But when I asked to color in a mora cow, the speaker picked up all the brown pencils, the gray pencil, and the black pencils, and mixed the colors together. So when I asked about the black pencil, the speaker said that the black pencil is not black. They didn't use the term tia, which refers to black in Hamar. They rather said that the black pencil was also mora. And then later in the conversation, they explained to me that a black marker is the real black, the pure black. Or for example, the black border printed on the border of the cow image on the sheet, that is also a real black. So it seems that the difference has to do with desaturated features and the fact that mora colors are not translucent hues, whereas black has to be somehow translucent. And this is not unheard of in the languages of the world, but it's interesting that from these type of tasks, you can understand better also the meaning of the hue-related meanings of these terms. Okay, so the last task that I want to discuss is the pattern naming task. The pattern naming task was simply an adaptation of a test that was carried out in the 70s and in the 80s by Fukui. Fukui is a Japanese anthropologist, a Japanese cognitive anthropologist who was particularly interested in cattle color terms and the interaction of language and genetics, the genetics of cattle colors. He worked with a body pastoralist who live north of Hamar. And basically he designed abstract patterns and asked the body pastoralist to describe these patterns. What I did, I used some of the patterns that Fukui published in one of his papers, and I added more patterns, in particular color patterns and designs that Fukui didn't include. I created pattern cards, and I worked with 2 small groups and also with 2 individual speakers. And well, from this test also, as also Fukui basically found out for the body, the design on the cards is conceptualized as an animal coat. And I mean, this is true also for clothes, for blankets, for beadworks. The cattle terminology is used to describe these terms. So here you see a term that should be familiar to us now, gawa, the bicolor pattern. This particular card was labeled gawa, and as you can see, it's because it kind of separates the picture with a bicolor pattern. Interesting insights come from dotted and striped pattern cards. So in Hamar, there are 2 terms that have been translated as spotted or dotted. These are zargi and bordi. Now, from the pattern naming task and the drawing task and the picture, the color, pardon me, the cattle naming task, it seems that the difference between zargi and bordi has to do with the size of these dots or spots. So zargi seems to refer to smaller spots compared to those referred to as bordi. The problem is when patterns that are not displaying spots are also labeled zargi or bordi. So here you can see the grid design that was labeled zargi, and a checkered design that was labeled as bordi. And the picture gets more complicated when stripes, thin stripes, are also referred to as zargi. So very thin stripes of any color and also in any type of orientation can be referred to as zargi. Also the repeated small patterns on clothes, so regular small patterns on clothes and blankets are also referred to as zargi, and zargi is also the pattern of the spotted aloe vera. So when we look at bordi, bordi refers to larger, maybe irregular patterns. So if you look at the floral pattern on the t-shirt on the bottom, that is referred as bordi. Bordi was also the pattern of the locusts that we had in Hamar back in March. And also the bold spots on somebody's hair are referred to as bordi. I've also heard the term bordi being used to describe the pattern on the skin of an orange. One last example that I want to show you is the term shota. Shota was used to describe all sorts of stripes, again, any type of orientation, color, as far as they're not thin stripes as those described as zargi. The term shota is used for stripes, but also for patterns that kind of alternate different colors. So not necessarily stripes, in fact. Shota is also the term that is used to describe the pattern created by the clouds on the sky. So it seems that even pattern categories in woven cultures need to be reconsidered and reevaluated. Because actually it seems that the meaning of these terms corresponds to the visual effect, the total visual effect that is given by combining different features, not only pure hues or pure patterns as we understand them. So, well, I want to stop here. I focused on these 3 tasks in today's talk, but of course, there is a whole part of my methodology that hasn't been discussed, and this includes the collection of the cattle talk corpus, the Hamar cattle lore, but also the investigation of the naming practices for humans and animals. The investigation of naming practices is crucial to understand the Hamar classification system of this of appearance. But it's really too complex and too elaborated to squeeze it here. Also, I could observe several practices of language socialization, so how the children are socialized into cattle talk through games and things like that. So, well, I'd like to thank you for the attention. I have put here a very summary of the most important literature on this specific topic. And I would like to hear from you what you think about this and if you have applied similar methods in your fieldwork. Thank you.
Thank you, Sara, for this very interesting presentation. I think we can now begin the question and answer section. So if anyone would like to ask a question or offer a comment, you can do so using the Zoom chat module. And to give the other participants some time to write, I'm going to start with a question of my own. Now, I don't have any experience with cattle, but I have some experience with horses. And they're not just the color of the coat, but also the color of the skin or the color of the manes or the hair might be important in classifying a color. Do you find something similar for the cattle that you looked at?
Yeah, sorry, you said the color, or
yeah. So, for example, if you have a horse which is white grayish, yeah. They can have exactly the same color of coat, but only by looking at the skin around the nose or around the eyes can you actually tell whether it's a gray or a white. So you have other aspects of their appearance which are very important for the classification of their color.
Yeah. I mean, yes, for sure. And the thing is that this system and this way of investigating this topic is applicable to any sort of animal classification. And actually, I mean, I'm not any expert of horses, and there are, I mean, horses are not so important in Hamar, but for sure there are interesting correlations also with the coats of camels among those pastoralists that that are focused more on camels. So yeah, I mean, definitely there are a lot of interesting aspects that have to come together to build the meanings of these terms, and they don't have to do only on the with the distribution of colors and patterns, but also with, as I said, the whole visual experience.
All right, thank you. And then I'll move on to some comments, which you can see appearing in the chat module. So the first is from Harold, who says a comment. He says, really interesting stuff, and he's eagerly waiting for the write-up. Sorry. Then there's a comment from Maarten, who says, fantastic. When will you present the rest?
Anytime, whenever there is a space, anywhere, I will be super happy to show the rest of the methodology and the findings. And as for the write-up, I'm actually preparing a paper on this methodology and on the results. This will come in a different paper though.
All right, then I'll move on to Christian. He says, thanks a lot. It was very interesting. Concerning the archaic term for red, so bench had zok, red, Hamar, Mora, brown, gray, again cross-referencing bench, Ter, dark brown, gray of cattle, and Tia, the black, again a cross-referencing of bench.
Very black. Yeah, very interesting. I mean, Christian, we have to look at these terms because the Hamar system seems to be mixed. There are also a lot of terms that seem to be borrowed from the Surmic languages, which are spoken north of Hamar, and actually the term der seems to be also seems to have reflexes in Bodi and Mursi. So it could be that Zo was the original Hamar term for red. I don't know. We will have to look into this.
Maarten then says, I never got cattle colors, I think, when using those color chips in Iraku or Konzo.
This is interesting. What about clothes, blankets, and other types of appearance? I find that sometimes it can be useful to explain that these pattern cards are representing clothes. That might work.
Then I'll move on to Anha, who has a comment which is very interesting. I follow Christian on Zo, red, while Oita has Zo noted.
Okay, so we can say that Zo is a nomotic root, I guess.
And then I have a question from Harold. He asked, is it crucial that you can do the fieldwork using Hamar? For example, would the methodology work equally well if you used another meta language?
Yeah, for sure, this is a super relevant question. I mean, I was extremely facilitated by the fact that I speak a sort of broken Hamar. I'm not sure that the same type of results can be obtained using a meta language, but this is exactly the reason why I wanted to try with Borana and other pastoralist groups to see how does that work. Probably you can't get the same level of depth, but I think the visual stimuli are kind of useful in collecting at least comparative lexical data.
There's another question too, actually, from Alice. She says, thanks, Sara, for this great presentation. She has two questions. First, are particular cattle coat patterns especially prized or valued among Hamar? And if so, did these preferences reveal themselves in the way your participants reacted to the photo naming task? And secondly, are your participants literate / experienced using pens? How did they react to the coloring task? She says, I have tried to do some drawing tests before with the Toba children, but they were a bit of a disaster because they had no experience using writing materials, but perhaps coloring is different.
Thank you, Alice. This is also a very relevant question that I should have discussed in the presentation. So first of all, there is no correlation with a favorite or preferred cattle coat patterns and the responses with the tests. However, I did ask specifically in one of the informal conversations, what are the favorite, the preferred coats, in order to understand yeah, I mean, extra meaning. For example, I was told that Sylvie, that is a very important, I mean, this is what boys like the most, especially for goats, because girls like it to make their skirt. So when they slaughter a goat, the girls would go to them to ask for the leather to make their skirts. As far for your second question, this was a risk because a lot of the Hamar people I worked with are not literate, but I have to say they were very comfortable with pens, even people that don't go to school and never used pens. With children is more difficult, I have to say, but with adult men, I didn't have any problem. I didn't try with women. I did try with children, but as you say, with your experience, the children was a bit of a disaster because they have really no experience. But in general, the coloring task doesn't. You don't need to know how to write. You can just show what parts of the body are relevant for that particular term.
Yeah, so I have a question from Michael Karani. He says, very interesting talk. Are there patterns / combination of colors on animals that go unnoticed / ignored? For example, because the pattern is made up of many colors or is an unusual combination?
I got this type of information from the commentaries. So for some codes, I specifically asked speakers in group to explain to me, especially when I got several different responses. So sometimes it happens that the same code is elicits a different response from adult men, which are like the highest ranked knowledgeable people about appearance. So in that cases, I would discuss with people and they would explain to me that some patterns develop. So I have really specific cases in which the speakers would say, if this specific cow in the picture eats well and doesn't get sick, the redness will appear later on the leg, and then it will become, and they would name that term. So, I mean, it has to do a lot also with the indigenous knowledge and how they know that these patterns and colors develop also throughout the life of the animals. So sometimes it can happen that patterns can be unnoticed, but just because they develop at a later stage. I don't know if I answered your question, Michael.
I have a reference from Bonnie Sands, Turton 1980. There's no such beast, cattle, and color naming among the Morsi.
Yeah, that is also in my references.
And then I've got some questions by Andrew. You've mentioned that in addition to Hamar, you're planning to work with Oromo and Maasai. Why have you decided to work with more than one language? Are you expecting to find similarities and differences? And if so, what do you think they might be?
I tried to pick languages that belong to different language families. So, well, I chose Maasai, first of all, because there is also very solid anthropological and linguistic literature on this topic. So in that sense that would be facilitated. And I think that there are similarities, and I expect to find similarities in the sense of how these categories are conceptualized. So I have already found a lot of links with, between Hamar and Masai in terms of the existing categories. But then in general, I think it's useful to have comparative data also for historical investigations.
Then I have two more references from Bonnie Sands. The first is by Weimer's 1988, Turkana cattle classification, some preliminary notes. And the second one is by Paul de Wolf from 1985 on the semantics of descriptive cattle names in Fulani.
Very nice. This sounds new to me. I've seen the first one about Turkana, but not the second one. I have to say I focused only on the literature on East African pastoralists, so not on the Fulani. I've looked at the pastoralists that are traditionally included in Erskovitz cattle complex society. So really East Africa alone. But thank you very much, Bonnie, for this reference. I will say thank you, Bonnie. Just if anybody comes across any piece of literature or work on this topic, please feel free to let me know or email it to me.
Okay, and thank you. I think those were all the questions and comments for today. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind everyone that recordings of all of the presentation in the Rift Valley Webinar Series can be found on the Rift Valley Network YouTube page, and entries for each presentation are added to the Rift Valley bibliography. Looking ahead, the next presentation in the webinar series will be given on Wednesday, June 17th by Emmanuel Dudiek, and it's titled The Impact of Multilingualism on the Toga Well-Being. And with that, I would like to thank Sara again for a very interesting presentation, and of course everyone else for participating today, and I hope to see you again at our next webinar.